Once again, thank you very much for everyone joining this exclusive webinar today, being arranged by Madinah Institute of Leadership and Entrepreneurship. The quick background about the author. Dr. Henri Servaes is the Richard Brearley Professor of Corporate Governance and Professor of Finance at London Business School. He is a research fellow on the Center for Economic Policy Research and a research associate of the European Corporate Governance Institute. Dr. Henry holds a BBA from European University and a MSIA and a PhD in finance from Purdue University.
Evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. It is a pleasure for me to talk to you about a topic near and dear to my heart, which is the financial mistakes that CFOs make. You may, of course, think, well, who is he to come and what am I going to talk about? I'll first talk a little bit about the tools available to managers and actually argue that the job has become a lot easier today than it was. But then I'll argue at the same time that indeed the job may have become, more difficult, and there might be a variety of reasons for that. And then I'll go through a list of mistakes, and of course there are many issues to discuss. And for today, I will just limit myself to a few mistakes in three areas in particular. One is how firms actually decide on their investments. The second is how firms decide to fund themselves. The third are mistakes in mergers and acquisitions. And then the fourth are mistakes in risk management. We also have a lot more as a chief. They're trained, and CFOs are also better understood by CEOs. There's a little bit of work done showing what fraction of CEOs in the UK that are members of the FTSE 100 index, what fraction of the CEOs have a finance background, and that's now something like 40%, and suggestions are that it's even higher more recently. A mistake that I want to talk about is a mistake in capital budgeting. So mistakes that are made in terms of the allocation of capital and in terms of investment decisions. And the first mistake that I would actually like to allude to is an over-reliance on spreadsheets. It may sound funny coming from a finance professor that I argue against spreadsheets, but I think this is a pervasive issue. How has this evolved? Well, I think 20 and 30 years ago, when firms were allocating capital, it was mainly based on a story. Somebody said, this is a good project. I think I'm going to make this happen. This is a new market. This is a new product. I think we can make some money here. Let's do it. And people bought into the person. They bought into the story, and they did it. But now that story is, of course, not good enough. Now you need the financials to back it up. And I think that's extremely important. You can't allocate resources based on a story. You need the financial plan to back it up. And so now people say, is the present value positive? Or does the rate of return exceed the required to do the financial analysis? Now, the problem is that over time, instead of using the financials to back up the story, people have started using the financials sort of as telling their own story, and the story itself is no longer told. The second mistake is related to this, which has to do with the follow-up. The third mistake deals with an assessment of risk. And so as the last point I want to make in terms of allocation of capital is that firms set too high of a target in terms of assessing required rates of return. I've worked with one German company that computes its required rate of return and then adds 200 basis points, so 2% to that, to obtain a hurdle rate for investment purposes. So that's the first topic. The second topic is about how you should fund the business, capital structure mistakes. The new company will be worth 357 billion. Before the acquisition, BHP was worth 218 billion. So what do you need for this stuff to work? What you need for this stuff to work is that the fraction of this entire new business that's owned by BHP shareholders is over 61%. If they own 61% of this business, they will have more than the 218 billion that's there. This comes to a related mistake, which I call buying a spreadsheet. But what they actually ended up buying instead was just a spreadsheet, some inflated financial projections. This can easily be avoided, but you have to exercise caution and care when doing this. And then there are many more mistakes in M&A, but just in the interest of time, and there's only one more in this slide, there is what I call the perception gap. We're value creating for the buyer. They then went and asked the managers whether they had created value. More than 90% of the CEOs said that they had created value. This difference is what I call the perception gap. We need to learn from past mistakes, not past mistakes. We are not going to learn from past mistakes. These are the elements that I'm going to finish with. I have a section on risk management, which I will be happy to share with you, but I'm not going to talk about risk management in detail in the interest of time. Let me just highlight what I think some of the issues are on risk management. One issue is thinking in silos. And what I mean by that is that people think about different pockets of risk separately and try to manage these different pockets of risk separately. But what actually should be done is these risks should be combined to look at the overall risk on the firm. If you are a risk manager, you should not let your view play a role. Views don't matter. In the end, market prices matter for risk management. So active positions means you take a position in a risk management tool without actually having the exposure to the risk. So it's pure speculation. And you can see that half of the CFOs said never, but the other half said that they sometimes do it. Few say often, but basically 50% of all companies admit that they sometimes speculate. Now, risk management and speculation do not go together, obviously, and that needs to be avoided at all costs. And there are some reasons why that may be the case, but I'm not going to go into that. So let me just give you my final thoughts on this. It's, of course, a very brief session, but I think it's hard to quantify the price of making these mistakes, but I think it is substantial. I think if you bring these mistakes together for all the companies, we are talking about several billions of dollars. I wouldn't be surprised if we get hundreds of billions of dollars cost to firms because they make these mistakes. I think many of them are avoidable. I think some just require a change in corporate mindset. Others require a change in compensation policies. But I think they can be avoided if people realize that these mistakes happen. Of course, this is by far not an exhaustive list, and I have a lot more points to make. But I hope you found this initial list at least useful, and maybe it piqued your interest in hearing some more about these issues. Thank you very much for your attention.